Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin, and today on Daddy Roll the One, I'm going to be doing part of my series on the history of early tabletop role-playing games, including Dungeons and Dragons, by offering a tribute to Jennell Jaquays, who was an integral part of the early history of the hobby, going back to almost the very, very beginning. And Jennell unfortunately passed away yesterday, January 10th of 2024. She fell ill kind of in the fall. I don't know how long the illness had lasted, but in the fall was the first time that I had heard that she was sick. And again, she just passed away yesterday. And so I thought it was important to acknowledge all of the achievements and accomplishments that she made to the game over the years. So just a brief history. Jennell was born in 1956 and discovered the game of Dungeons and Dragons while she was in college in 1975. And what I have heard, what I remember seeing was that she saw an ad for the game in a magazine called The Space Gamer. I've talked briefly about The Space Gamer before, but it was a magazine, similar in concept to Dragon magazine, covering the gaming industry with, ideas and articles and things like that. And she saw an ad for Dungeons and Dragons. She purchased the game. I believe she ordered it, the box set that I've shown here before on the channel, the three little white books. There were brown books actually in the white box. And almost immediately after purchasing the game of Dungeons and Dragons and playing it, she decided to start a fanzine with a friend of hers, with the idea that there weren't really any, at the time, zines out there or magazines covering the game of Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the things that I saw her quoted as saying, and I'm paraphrasing, this isn't the specific quote, but she said that she thought it would be cool if there were adventures that were ready to go, that a DM could use and run a group of players through, rather than having to create it themselves ahead of time or just rolling dice on random tables on the fly, but having something that was complete and packaged and ready to go. And so she started a zine called the Dungeoneer, and the layout and the art and many of the articles were by Jennell Jaquays. And she started publishing that in June of 1976. So that's an important date for two reasons. First is June of 1976 is also the first issue of The Dragon magazine. Later just becomes Dragon, but at the time it was called The Dragon. And so issue number 1 of The Dragon, which was the successor publication to the Strategic Review. So it comes out in June of 1976, the same month and year as the first issue of Jennell Jaquays' fanzine, The Dungeoneer. Also, what's interesting is that there is an adventure printed in The Dungeoneer, and I'm going to probably butcher this name, but I believe it's Fichelrak's Tomb. But that was an adventure that was published in The Dungeoneer. And that same month and year also, We Warriors, we've talked about them before, published the first, published role-playing game adventure in the same month. So the Palace of the Silver Vampire, I believe it was called. So I might have gotten that name wrong, but we've talked about that adventure before. And so those two adventures published the same month, same year. Those are the first two published role-playing game adventures for the game of Dungeons and Dragons. So not even TSR was publishing adventures at this time. There was the Temple of the Frog in, Supplement 2, which is Blackmore. That was 1975. So some people might consider that the first published one, but these were the first specifically done adventures that were published. So anyway, Jennell Jaquays was ahead of the curve in recognizing that DMs were going to want pre-published adventures that they could run, and that was a key element for her wanting to put together the Dungeoneer. So again, this is just going to be a brief overview of her career. She did so much for the hobby over the years. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. But she runs the Dungeoneer for 6 issues. And again, she's in college, so she's doing this in her spare time and, using the equipment of the time, which, nowadays we would consider quite primitive, but that's just what was available back then. So she runs that magazine or zine for 6 issues. She ends up selling it to a man named Chuck Anshell, who worked at a miniatures company, like gaming miniatures company. He later ends up working for Judges Guild, another company that was publishing game material that kind of started partially to publish materials that were compatible with Dungeons and Dragons. And so Chuck ends up working for them, and he brings the Dungeoneer along with him because he had purchased the rights to it. And so the Dungeoneer ends up being published by Judges Guild for a while. Now, interestingly enough, to kind of come full circle, Jennell Jaquays ends up working for Judges Guild as well. And so she ends up writing articles and doing art for the Dungeoneer under the Judges Guild, company publication. And she mentioned in an interview once that she actually did more work for the Dungeoneer when it was being published by Judges Guild than she did when she kind of ran it on her own for those first 6 issues. So that's kind of just a brief overview of the Dungeoneer, that publication. But while she's at Judges Guild, she ends up writing 2 very important adventures in the history of tabletop role-playing game. So the first one was called Dark Tower. And this was actually listed in Dungeon Magazine. So that was the sister publication of Dragon Magazine that focused solely on adventures. And in 2004, I think it was, they did a list of the top 30 Dungeons and Dragons adventures of all time. And Jennell Jaquays' Dark Tower was the only one on the list of the top 30 that was not published by TSR. It was published by Judges Guild, but a very influential, at the time they called them modules, but, adventure. It's considered by many to be one of, if not the first, mega dungeon. It was an 80-page publication, and it was so popular that Goodman Games, who has been publishing a series of adventures called Original Adventures Reincarnated, where they've taken old, out-of-print TSR adventures like Keep on the Borderlands and like Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, Castle Amber, those types of adventures, and repackaging them in these nice hardback books. And there's a whole series of them. And the first 6, I think it was, were all old TSR adventures. And the 7th one, Original Adventures Reincarnated, number 7, was for Jennell Jaquays' Dark Tower from Judges Guild. And they just did a Kickstarter, and it was recent. And it made over $450,000. That's how much people were interested in seeing this adventure reprinted. So, unfortunately, Jennell Jaquays is no longer with us now to kind of benefit from that. But it was nice she was alive to see how popular that Kickstarter was. So that was Dark Tower. Now, another adventure that she wrote for Judges Guild was called The Caverns of Thracia. So this one's very interesting. Again, I think it was an 80-page publication, but it has this sort of Greek mythology aesthetic to it, which was different at the time from the standard fantasy that people were doing, kind of that like faux medieval fantasy. She went into a Greek mythology aesthetic, and it is a sort of combination of a dungeon and a lost city, and it helped kind of start defining part of the campaign setting that Judges Guild's going to end up publishing with, like the City State of the Invisible Overlord and the Wilderlands of High Fantasy. It kind of fits into that aesthetic of the types of products that Judges Guild was publishing at this time, which were very different than the stuff that TSR was doing. So that's her work at Judges Guild. Now, again, she's doing many more things. I'm just hitting some highlights here, okay? But just to try to show how some of her early design work was so influential to the history of the hobby. Okay, so she's working for Judges Guild. She also ends up working for TSR. And the first piece of work that she does for TSR is in issue number 2 of Dragon Magazine. And this is some art that she did for an article on, judging. Well, they called them judges back then, or referees instead of DMs. DM wasn't really the common term in usage at the dawn of the hobby like it is now. And so there was an article about advice for judges, and she did this piece of artwork here. I think it's a goblin, but that's the first work I can find that she did for TSR. But then she goes on to do work for cover art a lot, and she does interior art a lot in Dragon Magazine, but she does a lot of cover art. So issue number 21 was her first cover, and you see here the figures that fighting this white dragon out in the snowstorm. So it's a very full of like action type of the layout and the way that she's structured the painting here. But these figures, they're kind of Viking-esque, but they also kind of have sort of like that faux Greek or faux Roman sort of aesthetic that I think kind of fits in with the types of design that she was doing for Judges Guild. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. But she does go on later to do many more covers. So I just have a few here that I wanted to share. So this is one that I have in my collection, of course, is issue number 152. So this is some art that she did for this full color painting. And you can see just the passage of time, how her style has kind of matured and gotten a little bit more technical. You can see the signature down there at the bottom. Okay, so that's issue 152. And then issue 175 for Dragon Magazine. I really like this one. It's got this kind of dreamlike quality almost to it. I just look at that. I think that's just really neat. So there's that one. This one's a very special one. So they chose Jennell Jaquays to illustrate the cover for their 16th anniversary issue. This is issue number 182. And she does a great job illustrating dragons, painting dragons. But just, look at the detail on the scales and everything like that. And then this is a very touching one because if you see here, these two young children figures. So these are modeled after her own kids at the time of the age they were when she did this painting. So this is going to be like the late 80s. I forget exactly. June 1992. Okay, so that's just some of the cover art that she did for TSR. Now, other things that she did at TSR, and again, I'm just hitting some highlights here. This is not an exhaustive list, so feel free to come in the comments and comment on what your favorite product is that she wrote. I'm sure I'm going to miss a bunch because, again, I wasn't intending to cover everything. I'm just hitting some highlights, especially ones that I actually have in my collection, whether as PDFs or as physical products, like you saw in my Dragon magazines. But she did this classic cover for Dragon Mountain. This was a box set released in 1993. And it's sort of an iconic image from the TSR era of Dungeons and Dragons. So you've probably seen this image. They use it a lot on other products, but it was originally designed for this Dragon Mountain box set. And that is a Jennell Jaquays painting that I just love. It's really great. She worked on FR5, FR standing for Forgotten Realms, series of modules. So this is FR5, the Savage Frontier. Now, she didn't do the cover art for this, but she wrote this. So this is now we're getting into some of the stuff that Jennell wrote for TSR. And this was expanding an area of the Forgotten Realms that hadn't really been dealt with. So a lot of this stuff she's just creating from whole cloth and just using her imagination. And it's brilliant. It's really well done. It's a fun module, adding to the lore of the Forgotten Realms. And she also did this book. Now, this one is a favorite of many people from the second edition era of Dungeons and Dragons. This is the campaign Sourcebook and Catacomb guide. And she wrote this one again and co-authored it with a man named William W. Connors. Now, I talked about him in my last video on it's part of my DM advice series, but William Connors was a big designer at TSR, again, during that kind of late TSR era. So sort of like late 80s through the mid 90s. And I chat with him on, well, it used to be on Twitter. Now it's on Blue Sky, but we chat quite frequently. And when it came up that there were a bunch of us that were really big fans of this campaign Sourcebook and Catacomb guide, he was like the first one to basically say like, no, like, my name's on there, but like, really, this was Jennell's thing. It was her idea. She was the creative one that worked on this. And he's a very modest guy, but she jumped into the comments and they had this like neat little chat back and forth about this product. And it was just fun to read and fun to watch. This is, a few years ago. And so this is a book of sort of like, it's some player advice, but it's mostly it's DM advice. It's helping DMs learn how to understand what their players want and how to adapt your game to make your players happy. And different players have different needs and wants in the game. And so it's talking about how to do that and giving you tons of ideas to make your campaign, again, more creative. That's the part of the title of the book, right? But this was so influential at the time because nobody was talking about stuff like this. Everyone was just doing adventures or new monsters or new spells. And that's I don't want to say it's the easy stuff, but like that's the stuff most people think of. But a whole book dedicated to basically how to be a better DM. Nowadays, there's a lot of books like this. But this advice from here was one of the first places where you could find this all in one area. There were articles in Dragon Magazine, of course, but having a whole book dedicated to it was really kind of novel at the time. And this advice that she puts in here is still relevant today. This is a book you can pick up right now. There's really no mechanics in this book at all. And so this is available on DriveThruRPG, and I definitely recommend picking it up if you're a DM and you've never checked this out. I'll put a link in the show notes below. It's not an affiliate link. I don't make any money. I'm just trying to help you guys find it so you don't have to search for it on your own. So that's some of her work at TSR. Now, she also did work on a module called DQ1 that you see here. So this was an interesting experiment. It was a dual stat adventure. So DQ stands for Dragon Quest. And this is a combination advanced D&D adventure, but it's also a Dragon Quest adventure. So Dragon Quest was you could call it a competitor role-playing game, but it ended up being purchased and published by TSR. And so they were trying to push it for a while. And so one of the ways that they thought that they could get people to kind of like give the game a chance was to do these dual stat adventures so that people could kind of get a sense of what Dragon Quest was really like. So this was I think it's one of the first dual stat adventures, for any game system. So that's DQ1. And then an interesting little experiment. I had completely forgotten about this game. It's been in a bottom drawer in my office. I have like a whole little game nook that's mostly board games. I have all my box sets over there for role-playing games, but the rest of it's mostly like strategic board games. And I have a few Lego sets over there. But there's a drawer on the bottom, and it's full of like all the little mini games, like, Uno's in there and just decks of cards and various things like that. And at the bottom was this. This is an old game from I think it's the 90s, might be late 80s. It's called Dragon Dice. And it, came in this bag, and it was this, this was one of TSR's attempts to kind of like get in on the sort of collectible era, like, Magic the Gathering. They had another game called Spellfire, I think it was called, from TSR. That was a card game, but this was another attempt to get in on like that kind of collectible small game format. So this is called Dragon Dice. And I bring this up because Jennell Jaquays did a lot of the art that appeared on the dice. I shouldn't have picked up so many at once here because they're going to fall. But a lot of the artwork that you see, the designs on these dice, was done by Jennell Jaquays. So just kind of wanted to show that it's a fun little artifact of the era. Nobody really talks about Dragon Dice anymore. And like I said, I'd completely forgotten about it until I started working on this video. So that's Dragon Dice. Now, she kept working on and off for TSR throughout the years. So as late as 3rd edition 3.5, she did an illustration in here for the Sahuagin. So, and just in case anyone wants to correct my spelling, I looked it up in Dragon Magazine number issue 93. There was a pronunciation guide, and it said that it's pronounced Sahuagin. Pronounce it however you want. I'm just saying, like, that's what the pronunciation guy did. But she did this illustration right here. And now this is Wizards of the Coast era, but they liked it enough that when they reprinted the Monster Manual for the 3.5 version of D&D, they reused the same illustration. They didn't do a new one. They just put it in there again. So she did that. Now, some other design work that Jennell did. She did these central casting books. So these are a series of books about NPC designs. It's essentially trying to give DMs quick, ideas and tables for NPCs to put into a game. And she did a whole series of these. And these are sort of generic supplements. They're not designed specifically for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeons and Dragons or any other game. they're meant to be system neutral for referees to kind of use in whatever system that they want, but it's giving them help at the table to have like, NPCs at the ready. And these were super, super popular with folks back in kind of like the, mid late 80s time period. So she worked on those, and then she does end up doing some work with Chaosium. So they were the publishers of several different role playing games. Call of Cthulhu probably being the main one that people know of. But Chaosium published Runequest, which was a fantasy role playing game and could be considered a competitor to Dungeons and Dragons. And so one of the products that she worked on when she was there was it's called Griffin Mountain. Now this actually started out as a supplement that she was writing for Judges Guild. And Judges Guild eventually didn't publish it. So she had written it while she worked there, but they didn't publish it. But there was a gentleman by the name of, I think it was Greg Stafford at Chaosium, and somehow he got word of this supplement existing. And so he ended up publishing it as a RuneQuest supplement for RuneQuest at Chaosium. And again, a very, very popular supplement. It's a wilderness campaign setting, or a wilderness, I should say, wilderness campaign setting. And so that was published by Chaosium in 1981. And again, another very, very popular supplement with people who play that game. So it got a lot of press at the time for being, very well put together and well constructed campaign setting for wilderness campaigns. All right. So she's doing that kind of stuff. But then also she ends up working for the video game industry. And she did work at Coleco, and she worked there for many, many years. But again, she's still involved in role-playing games. So Dragon Magazine number issue 144. And so this is you can tell right away, this is going to be the April issue, April Fool's. TSR was really big on, or Dragon Magazine was really big on these April issues, which is, I think, very fun. But she wrote an article in here for the RuneQuest game. Called When Gods Walk the Earth, Summoning Gods and Greater Spirits in Chaosium's RuneQuest. So this is the only article I could find that she wrote for Dragon Magazine, but like I said, she also did interior art and then some of those covers that we've talked about previously. So that's going to be basically it for this quick overview of the career and life of Jennell Jaquays. Just thought it was really important to acknowledge such a crucial, integral part of the history of the tabletop role-playing game hobby. And, I feel bad maybe that I didn't get to talking about Jennell before she passed away. I've mentioned her a few times here and there, but again, just wanted to take a moment and reflect back on all the contributions that she made to the game and the hobby that we all love today, almost 50 years later after she first started getting involved with the game back in 1975. So I'll end my tribute here with just again putting this cover on, this anniversary issue of Dragon Magazine that had a couple of her kids in it from the 90s. And would just like to say thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Now for the bonus content. I actually wasn't originally going to do this for this video, but, I wanted to, again, just acknowledge the contributions that Jennell Jaquays made to the hobby. And sometimes it's important to just understand that we're sad about things and talk about it. So, I'm particularly sad because, again, I had communicated with Jennell Jaquays a little bit on Twitter and on Facebook. And so it's like I didn't know her. She would have no idea who I am. But, unlike someone like Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson, whom I never spoke with, I actually did sort of, know Jennell Jaquays. And so it hit me a little harder than probably some other people passing might have. But in any event, I was drinking this while I made my notes. This is AMARO SFUMATO, and this is a RABABARO style of Amari. So if you remember, Amari are Italian liqueurs that are like bitter. They're bitter liqueurs. Now, Sfumato is based off of the Italian word for smoke, and which is fumo. And this does have a little bit of smoky characteristic, but the main ingredient, so RABABAROs, the main ingredient of those is rhubarb. So there's a whole category of amari called rabarbaros that are made with rhubarb as the main ingredient. But just like chinar I talked about before is based on artichoke, but you don't taste artichoke when you taste it. It's sort of like, vodka is made with potatoes a lot of times, but you don't say it tastes like potatoes, right? So don't be thrown off by this being made with rhubarb, but it uses a special Chinese rhubarb, centuries old recipe, and it is bitter sweet, which is the reason I was drinking it. And then as far as what I was listening to, this is one of my go-to records, definitely a Desert Island pick for me, and something I listened to it at different periods, like when I have different feelings, but I particularly like to put this on when I'm feeling sad. It's just kind of something that I can sort of linger over and kind of let it wash over me. So this is the best selling jazz record of all time. This is Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, 1959. If you've watched the bonus content before, 1959 is a crucial year in the history of jazz music. So I've talked about two other albums from that year before, Giant Steps, which I just put in, I think, my last video. And then I've talked about Mingus but this is probably the key one from that year, 1959, Kind of Blue. So this is Miles Davis with his new quintet. So he's got Cannonball Adderley on saxophone. He's got Paul Chambers on bass, Jimmy Cobb on drums, John Coltrane also saxophone. Bill Evans does keys on every song but one, piano on every song but one. And then that song is Freddie Freeloader, and the keys on that were by Wynton Kelly. Now, this was really important at the time because all of these gentlemen are black, except Bill Evans is a white guy. And a lot of people were really upset that Miles put a white guy in his band. And Miles was just like, I need the right person for the right job. And it was him. So Bill Evans is actually credited not on the album, but posthumously, like later on, a lot of people said a lot of these compositions exist because Bill Evans kind of figured it out. So the famous kind of story on this one is that Miles moved from sort of a bebop style of music. He'd been shifting that way already, but he's moving away from harmonics and chord, like a lot of really complicated chord changes. And he moved into something that's called modal jazz. And the idea is that he's using a mode, which is usually just kind of like a key. And he didn't write music. So similarly to John Coltrane's Giant Steps, although that's not a modal jazz album by any means, but what Miles is doing is kind of saying like, this is sort of the mode that I want to be in. And he's just sort of like writing what the key changes are. And then the performers are improvising when they get into the studio. So for the most part, pretty much every song that you're hearing on this is a first take because Miles wanted that energy. And the music wasn't written down. So what you're hearing, not only is it a first take, but it's the first time that these musicians are figuring out what they're going to be playing for these different modes, these key changes. And it's just beautiful. So it's very contemplative jazz. And when you understand that these are first takes from musicians that did not have sheet music, so the actual thing that they're playing is not written down. They're just having to feel each other, trust each other, and listen to each other and understand what's going on and know when it's time to stop and when other people are going to come in. So it's a really great album. Again, the best selling jazz album of all time. I listen to it at least once a week. And I have a few different copies on vinyl. This is a mono copy. So the original album was released on mono. It's later redone in stereo, and I have a stereo version as well. But highly recommend this. And it was something that kept me company last night while I was working on my notes for today's video. So that's it again for this. And I'd like to say thanks for watching, and traveling mercies to our friend Jennell Jaquays. Cheers.